Hello and welcome to Hops and Bros. This week,
We're talking about Topaz Hop, and of course, it's a special request from you guys.
For an open window on a crafty world, Max and Chris from Ups and Bros. Ups and Bros. Welcome to Ups and Bros.
Alright, so this week we're doing a very special hop in the sense that before Chris mentioned it and before we got it from one of our listeners, I had no idea what that hop was and I had no idea where or how it would be used. Which you would think is surprising, but it's not really. Of what I can see in the brewing industry, people kind of have the hops they use and they stick to it. The only time they're going to diverge from that is if they want to create a very specific brew.
Yeah.
Which is kind of interesting.
Because this hop has been used by Samuel Adams a lot into their latest kind of like seasonal beers that they've done. I say latest, this hop has been trendy back in 2007, 2008. And this is a special request from Rafael Adoto. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right, but one of our fellow Brazilian, I guess I don't want to say Brazilian if you're not from Brazil exactly, but thanks a lot. You guys, we have a nice little viewership out there, and we'll make a little bit of efforts on our end to learn a little bit of Portuguese to talk with you guys.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy because when we look at our stats on Facebook, on YouTube, and it's probably going to be boring for you. I'm still going to go through it. I don't really care. It's interesting because most of our viewers from the States, then Canada, then Brazil, then Australia. It's kind of like, it's a weird progression. Like, you wouldn't think that Brazil would be so high as to be third place, but it is pretty cool.
So cheers to Brazil.
Yeah, cheers to Brazil. Maybe we'll have to go down there and try some beers. Although we did have Overhop in the past, which is a brewery originally from Brazil, and now also in Ontario and Quebec, which is pretty cool.
Yeah. But back to the main subject, the core subject from Craft Beer 101 this week. We're talking about Topaz Hop. Where does it come from? How do brewers use it? And where does this name came from and the whole thing? So basically it all started back in 1985 when an Australian hop brewer, we were talking about Australia a little bit earlier, started mixing up and breeding. It's a breeding farm, so basically not 100% a hop farm, but a breeding farm, taking care of making new species. But if you think back in 1985, they were kind of like in a rush to find high acid alpha hops. So they breeded one classic high acid alpha Australian hop with an English male plant, hop plant, to create the Topaz, which was a top hop in its category for the high acid level content. But
yeah, it's pretty impressive how high the alpha acid is on that hop. And if I'm not mistaken, it's the Topaz Valley. Is that where it was created?
In Victoria. I have Victoria.
Okay.
That's the only information I have. You have better information than I am. But overall, those two pairing up kind of created an underrated hop, I guess, that was mainly used in those areas. But after that, in 2007, 2008, brewers found Topaz. I don't know how, but it kind of added a lychee, fruity feel to their beers, but high ABV beers, not low ABV ones. So, which is, I think, something really interesting about it, because it's not always something we think about when we use it as homebrewing, Max is doing, or stuff like that. How well the, let's say, Mosaic will act in an high ABV beer. I don't know if I'm wrong with what I'm saying right now, but as a brewer...
No, not at all. But not just that, I mean, the fact that there's 4 ingredients in beer means that every single ingredient is very important, and when you add it, it's going to be equally as important. 2 things I wanted to add. First off, hop breeding. Hop breeding has been going on for... as long as there's been beer, people have been trying to create these super hop plants. And always, or almost always, to kind of circumvent not necessarily a defect, but something that could affect them in a negative way. You know, some are resistant to aphids, some are resistant to mildew, and every country has its own possible infections for those hops, so they constantly tried to create a more resistant hop. Now, before 2000, people were growing hops essentially for alpha acids and for resistance. They didn't really care about flavors because they weren't using them for flavoring. In 1985, it wasn't the big thing to go, oh, let's have the most juicy, dankest IPA we can. It wasn't a thing. It was, how do we maximize the amount of alpha acids in this beer to use less, basically. So that's why hops, even like Cascades, were created to replace some of the macro hops, because it was more efficient at giving bitterness. Topaz is the same. Now, in 2000, there was kind of a switch in the industry, or at least there was a start to a switch in the industry, where people were starting to use hops later and trying to use the actual flavor of the hop and not necessarily just the alpha acid. Topaz is considered a dual purpose because it's high in alpha. It's also very, very, very flavorful. So as Chris mentioned, lychee, there's some spice to it, clove, citrusy, not quite as high, which is kind of odd, but it's also very pairable. So it's the kind of hop that's going to add a lot of depth to a hop profile when used with Galaxy, Citra, even Cascade in some points.
Yeah, because this is what kind of like the hop website were recommending. Like, it looks a lot like Galaxy and Merlot, like those high acid alpha hops that are now used more as flavoring hops instead of bittering, but still as the stats, or let's say the acid alpha levels necessitated to create a perfect bittering hop, which I was a lot more blown away than I'm usually when I do hop research. I thought it was just like a one less known hop that you're like, man, you know, it's one that we have some funky flavors out of it. But basically, they tried to create a nice acid alpha homage, or kind of like interpretation of the classic British hops. That's what they wanted to pull out and create in Australia.
Which in some ways they did, but you also have to take under account the soil you're using. That's going to change your flavoring completely. If you look at the Citra and the Galaxy is the New Zealand version of Citra. They basically went through the exact same process to create that hop, but it turned out to have different flavors because of the soil and because of other factors, especially environmental, considering that it's being grown far, far away.
Sorry. Yeah.
No, so and the same thing with the Topaz. I'm assuming it was for the same reasons. You know, if they have Cascade in Canada, if they have those spicy ones in Europe, how do we get this in Australia and have it resist the infections we might have here, and how do we create the most efficient hop possible? And in the end, you get a very interesting hop. I'm going to use it for sure. I'm a big fan of hops from that region. Recently, we've brewed a beer with Motueka from New Zealand, and very satisfied. I really like that hop. I think it's very interesting. Now, when it comes to upscaling those hops, is it always efficient to go with a hop that's literally grown across the world, or should you go with something more local? I mean, it can be debated. Cascade is still my personal favorite hop, and I think it's going to remain my favorite hop for a while because I think it's the most versatile and pleasant hop I've worked with.
Oh, it's a blast. The first home brews I did was with Cascade. Like, I was supposed to use something else. I forgot I think I was supposed to use like Allerto and something else, and I used Cascade instead because I was just stoked on Cascade. I think the first beer we brewed together was with Cascade.
Cascade as well, yeah.
And
speaking of, I've got a special project for you, Chris. If you can track down that recipe, I'll brew it here with the better equipment and see if we can recreate this beer and make it right.
Oh God!
Or if you want, I'll bring my brewing equipment to Gatineau next time I go. And we'll try it. Me and you together. We'll brew it in the old set, and we'll try it out. We'll see what happens. You know, we'll try to do it right this time.
Oh shit! I saw pictures of that home brew day we did at home, like Facebook memory thing, if
Yeah.
I want to close the whole Facebook loop. And oh man, that was bad. Like I can see from the pictures the mistakes we've done. Can you?
Oh, yeah.
It's just bad, so bad. But yeah, I'll find the recipe. I think it's still somewhere out there. It's gonna take
Perfect.
me a
We'll
little bit
check
of
it
time,
out.
but I'll find it.
All right, so if you like this episode, please leave a like, subscribe, share, and let us know in the comments below which 101 you'd like to see. It doesn't have to be about hops. It can be about pretty much anything. But yeah, Topaz, very interesting. We'll see what happens. I might try to track some down and brew with it. It seems like a very interesting hop.
Yeah, and it's not that expensive. If you look through it, I checked the prices a little bit. Not that bad.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, done deal then.
Done deal. Cheers.